Welcome to Random Movie Reviews. I'm Nathan, and today I'll be talking about 10 sequels that I think are better than their originals. The keywords there are I think. Of course, this is just my opinion. But this was a list that I've been thinking about doing for a while. You know, this is hardly an original idea, but it is a debate that is kind of never ending in the movie community about which sequels are actually better than their originals. Of course, opinions will always vary, but, you know, when I was kind of doing research for this video, obviously I had movies that in my head are like, that's going to make my list no matter what. But when I was thinking of movies that are routinely named as being better than their originals, a lot of the same movies come up, some of which are on this list, some of which are not on this list. And before I jump into the 10 movies that I believe are better than their original films, I should probably preface this review with movies that are constantly named as being better than the originals that didn't make the list. The first one that comes to mind is The Godfather Part 2. Now, The Godfather Part 2 just might be my favorite movie of all time. I absolutely adore it, but I don't know if I can objectively say that it's better than the original film. When it comes to The Godfather Parts 1 and 2, I'm of the belief that you kind of need both movies to experience the entire story. And I'm at the point now where I can't really separate one from the other. I'll put it this way. Most of the sequels on this list, in fact, I think pretty much all of them, I can watch without having to watch the first one. Like, oh, I'm just in the mood for this, I'll put it on right now. When it comes to The Godfather Part 2, I don't think I've ever watched The Godfather Part 2 without watching the first one first. I can't just put on The Godfather Part 2 on its own. I have to watch the first part because then it feels like I'm watching like half of the story. The same thing could be said with the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Is there anyone out there that's like, oh, I'm just in the mood for Two Towers or Return of the King, and you watch it without watching Fellowship or the previous movies? It's like, how can you even do that? It's one epic story and you kind of need the whole thing in order to experience it. So that's kind of what I kept in mind. I'm like, these are sequels that I can put on anytime without having to watch the first movie and enjoy it as its own thing. Other movies that I didn't include were like thematic sequels, like for example, the Man with No Name trilogy. The Good, Bad, and the Ugly is another one of those movies that is probably in my top 10. I'm absolutely obsessed with that movie, but it's not really a sequel because it's not connected to the other two movies, even though it is one of those movies I can just put on anytime without having to watch the first two, but I don't think it technically counts as a sequel. Same thing goes with Evil Dead 2. Anyone who knows me knows I am super obsessed with all things Evil Dead related, specifically that of Evil Dead 2, one of my favorite movies ever. Doesn't really count as a sequel though, because it is technically a reimagining of the first movie. Those were kind of the rules that I established to make this list. And then other films that, you know, I didn't put on here is because maybe I don't think they are the best sequel ever. Like The Dark Knight, for example. I absolutely love The Dark Knight. It's a movie that was probably my favorite movie of all time when I was in middle school and early high school. But it is a movie that I do find to be a little bit overrated nowadays. I think it's absolutely amazing. I think Heath Ledger gives one of the greatest performances of all time, but there are some days where I actually prefer Batman Begins to The Dark Knight, and I don't know if I can say The Dark Knight is the better movie. I think it's better in some aspects, and I think Batman Begins and even The Dark Knight Rises are better in other aspects in comparison to The Dark Knight. So that's just one of those ones where I don't know if I can objectively say that it's better than the original. But with all these other movies, I have very specific reasons why, as I think they're superior to their original films, which I'll mention in this video, of course. One movie in particular, I have a long video breaking down the specifics as to why I think it's better than the original. I'll make sure to put it in the description below, but we haven't made it there yet, so I'll wait before I reveal that video. And before I start with the list, this list is not ranked. This was kind of hard enough to narrow down to 10 movies, and it would be even harder for me to actually rank from best to worst, so I'm not even going to bother with that. These are just 10 sequels that are my personal favorites and are examples that I think are better than their original films. So with that being said, let's start with the most obvious one on this list. If you can't tell, the framed poster behind me is the film I'm going to be starting with, Aliens. I absolutely love Aliens, and I love Alien. I think both movies are 5 out of 5 movies. I think both movies are perfect for what they're trying to do. But the reason I prefer Aliens over Alien is not for the same reasons that maybe other people prefer it. Like this, it's definitely more action-packed. It's faster paced. It's more ambitious with its visual storytelling and with its special effects and all of these things, and it is kind of like the easier movie to watch and rewatch. The reason I end up gravitating more towards Aliens as opposed to Alien is because of the emotional story that Ripley has, and especially her relationship with Newt, and Ripley as a whole. I mean, Aliens is really the movie that gave her a character, where in the first Alien, she is more or less the final girl of that movie. I mean, that's what makes Alien great, is that it's essentially a B-level horror movie in terms of its concept, executed with A-level talent in terms of the direction, the score, the sets, the performances, and the characters. But all of the characters are, by design, meant to be disposable. It's not until we get to Aliens where characters start to feel more fleshed out, specifically that of Ripley. This is the movie that established her specifically as being one of the greatest female hero protagonists of all time. It really kind of starts with Aliens because of her character arc and just how much she takes control throughout that movies. And when we get to the finale with the whole mama bear fight between her and the mother alien, I love both movies, and there are times where I'm in an Alien mood and I want to watch Alien, but oftentimes I return to Aliens more because there's just more of emotional connection in terms of its storytelling, in terms of its characters. And it is a much more ambitious movie. It gives you a little bit of everything. Not only do you get action, but there are horror elements in the movie that often get overlooked. Most people almost discredit Aliens for being a horror movie at all. It is a horror movie. I mean, that facehugger scene between Newt and Ripley is terrifying and one of the scariest and most awesome scenes in the entire franchise. But that's personally why I prefer Aliens. But Alien is still a perfect movie, so it's really an embarrassment of riches with these two movies. The next film on the list, another James Cameron one, and the last James Cameron one, is Terminator 2. Funny enough, Terminator 2 has a lot of parallels with Aliens in that both of their first movies are much more horror adjacent. They're much more stripped back in terms of their storytelling. They're more simple in that regard. And it's not until we get to the sequels that the themes that the movies were exploring in the first film get more fleshed out. We get more emotional depth with our characters. The stakes are a lot higher. The ambition in the filmmaking is much more prevalent. And it just gives you more awesome shit. I mean, Terminator 2 and Aliens are like almost exactly the same in that regard. I will say, in the case of Alien and Aliens, where I think both movies are perfect, I do have some issues with the first Terminator movie, and that is just, at the end of the day, the movie is more or less about a killer robot. Yes, there are themes touched upon about fate and war and humanity, but all of those themes would get greatly expanded on in the second movie with much more heart and much more detail in terms of the world building and just much more drama surrounded around the story that it's telling in the sequel. In fact, I did a video talking about the first Terminator movie, and I talk about why Terminator 2 is my preferred film in the series. And here's a little snippet of that video. I mean, thematically, the film is even deeper and more complex than the first Terminator. I think my favorite scene in all the Terminator movies, but specifically the first two, is the scene where Sarah Connor is having a nightmare about the nuclear apocalypse that leads into the war between man and machine. She wakes up and she's like, fuck this, I'm gonna go take care of this right now. And she's gonna go kill Miles Dyson, who is the engineer or scientist that ends up creating the first Terminator and Skynet. And he is an integral part as to why this war even begins in the first place. And so she goes over to his house and tries to assassinate them. But John Connor and the Terminator, the T-100, they go over there to stop Sarah. And then Sarah ends up having a breakdown because she ends up becoming the very thing that ruined her life, which is a Terminator. Someone who knows what the future is going to be and is looking to change it by killing somebody else. And then she realizes her mistakes. And it's thematically, it is such a powerful scene, and it's so major for her character. And it really, that elevates the movie to another level, just that scene alone for me. So yeah, Terminator 2. I love the first Terminator. I think it's great, but I do like Terminator 2 a lot more. Maybe not a lot more, but a good deal more. It's not like Aliens and Alien where I think they're like neck and neck, and I like both movies for different reasons, and I lean towards Aliens for a more specific reason. Where Terminator 2, it's like, yeah, I like it a bit more than the first Terminator, even though there are times where I'm in a Terminator mood and I want to watch that and not watch Terminator 2. But yeah, I had to go with Judgment Day. It had to be on the list. The next film I'm including is Dawn of the Dead, the original 70s version of Dawn of the Dead. One of my favorite horror movies of all time, specifically my favorite zombie movie of all time. I actually do like the remake. I think it's one of the better remakes of that era in the early 2000s where every horror movie under the sun was getting remade. It's definitely Zack Snyder's best movie, in my opinion. I'm not a big Zack Snyder fan. But I think his direction's really, really good in that movie, and I think the script that James Gunn wrote was great. I think that film's strongest asset is that it's not trying to be Dawn of the Dead. It's taking the same idea of people surviving in a mall with zombies, but the characters and how they interact with each other are completely different. The tones of both movies are completely different. But I still prefer the 70s Dawn of the Dead. And I think I've grown to really appreciate this film in terms of its kind of low-budget guerrilla-style filmmaking. George Romero was one of those filmmakers where he would kind of just shoot as much as possible and really kind of discover the movie in the editing. I think that's why there's so many different versions of Dawn of the Dead. I still prefer like the original American version. I think that's the one that is the best paced. But the thing about Dawn of the Dead that's so unique is that, you know, I think it's more of a satire than anything else. It's really commenting on like how zombies are a metaphor about how humanity can devour each other. And then with the whole mall aspect, there's, you know, touches on consumerism and commercialism as a whole. And I just like the differing tones in Dawn of the Dead. There are moments that are outright silly and comedic. There are moments that are very action-packed and suspenseful. There are moments that are outright sad and bleak as hell. And I just love the vibe of the movie. I kind of have an affinity for like down and dirty 70s horror movies. I like the grit. I like how unpolished they are. And Dawn of the Dead is an amazing example of that. It's a movie that you know, I find myself returning to more than any of the other Dead trilogy movies. I love Night of the Living Dead, and I'm a big fan of Day of the Dead. In fact, for a long time, I really didn't like Day of the Dead. It hasn't really been until recently that I've developed a completely new appreciation for that movie, and I really, really enjoy Day of the Dead now more than I ever have before. But Dawn of the Dead is still the best, in my opinion. One of the best horror movies ever. It's so unique, even in comparison to all the other zombie movies that have inspired it. It still feels completely original. I love the characters. I love the direction. I love the Goblin score. I just love it. Had to be on the list. All right, shifting from horror-ish type stuff, we're going right into action martial art films, and I am going with Drunken Master 2. Drunken Master 2 is one of those sequels where it's like, I pretty much only watched the sequel. I've seen the first Drunken Master. I remember watching it as a kid, and I've returned to it a couple of times afterwards. Admittedly, I haven't seen it in many, many years. But Drunken Master 2 is maybe the greatest martial arts movie I've ever seen, just in terms of fighting choreography alone. You know, the story of Drunken Master 2, the plot is not the most original in the world, and, you know, that's not why you watch the movie. You watch it for Jackie Chan, and I'm a big Jackie Chan fan. In fact, I have a video on this channel talking about my top 7 favorite Jackie Chan movies. I'll make sure to put that in the description below. But in terms of Drunken Master 2, not only is it significantly better than the first movie in terms of fighting choreography, but I think it just might be Jackie Chan's best kung fu movie in terms of the fight sequences. He definitely has other movies that have better stunts, like, you know, Police Story 3, I think is probably his best movie in terms of his stunt work. But in terms of fighting, Drunken Master 2 is maybe the greatest martial arts movie I've ever seen. The fight sequences in this film are still unmatched even by today's standards. They are just absolutely amazing. And it's why I return to the movie way more than the first Drunken Master movie, where that style of kung fu was very rhythmic, almost kind of robotic. It doesn't have the same kinetic energy that many later kung fu movies would have, specifically in the 80s and 90s. So yeah, Drunken Master 2, definitely one of those sequels that I think is substantially better than the first movie. I think the first movie definitely is more important. You know, it was kind of the Jackie Chan movie that set his career off in China in terms of establishing him as a comedic kung fu actor. That was kind of something that was new at the time, the idea of making a comedic kung fu movie. But in terms of just pure kung fu awesomeness, Drunken Master 2, way better. Keeping with the theme of martial art movies, I am going with The Raid 2 with this next entry. The first Raid movie, I think, is quite overrated. I don't think it's a bad movie by any means, but I've always kind of rejected the notion that it is one of the greatest movies ever made, especially in the action genre. It's routinely named as being one of the greatest action movies of all time. I just completely disagree with that. I think it's a fine action movie. I think many of the martial arts sequences in the movie are fantastic. I think the reason I don't have that much of a connection to the movie movie is because the story there's really nothing special going on there. I don't like how the action is filmed in the first Raid movie with all of this constant shaky cam. It looks quite amateurish. It looks quite bad, in my opinion. And then we get to the Raid 2, which is one of the few sequels that I think completely blows the original out of the water in like every single way. The story in the Raid 2 is much more engaging, much more complex. We actually get some great character stuff that are almost completely absent in the first movie. It is so much more ambitious with not just its storytelling and its characters and its plot, but also with the action sequences that are much better filmed this time around. There isn't quite as much as that, artificial shaky cam bullshit. It's filmed much more expertly. And the action sequences in the Raid 2 in particular are so much better than the first Raid. I think all of the accolades that the first Raid has garnered really belongs to the Raid 2. It is so much better. I've watched it so many more times than the first Raid movie. It's one of the best modern action movies, or movies of I think it came out around the 2010s. Definitely one of the best movies of that era. It's absolutely fucking incredible. It's brutal as hell, too. It's one of the most brutal action movies, so if you're kind of queasy when it comes to seeing some bodily harm, maybe avoid this movie. But if you love a good, vicious action movie from time to time, The Raid 2 is amazing. Obviously, if you're going to watch these movies and you haven't seen either of them, you should watch both of them. I mean, the first Raid is definitely a shorter movie. Raid 2 is over 2 hours, but I'm completely invested every single moment. That's one of the sequels on this list that just blows the original out of the water as far as I'm concerned. So the Raid 2, definitely one of the best sequels ever. And from there, we're going to the superhero genre. I'm going with the classic Spider-Man 2, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man 2. I actually really love the first Spider-Man movie a lot. I don't think Spider-Man 2 is one of those sequels that blows the original out of the water like the last film I talked about. There's a lot I really love about the first Spider-Man movie. It kind of set the tone for modern superhero movies during that time. I know it wasn't the first one. Movies like Blade and X-Men predate it, but Spider-Man has definitely aged better than those two movies in many ways. And Spider-Man 2 just basically takes all of the great stuff that you love in the first movie in terms of tone, in terms of style, in terms of fun superhero action, and makes it even better and centers all of that stuff around a much more compelling story that is much more personal, dealing with the inner turmoil that Peter Parker has with wanting to live a normal life and being forced to be a superhero, right? There's actually a lot of parallels between Spider-Man 2 and Superman 2, where Superman 2, the Christopher Reeve one, where Clark Kent, he also wants to give up his superpower so he can have like a normal life and a relationship with Lois Lane. And in Spider-Man 2, it's the same thing, where Peter wants to have a relationship with Mary Jane as a result of it. And it's one of those superhero movies that has a lot of heart and is much more intelligent than your average superhero movie in terms of how far it goes into dissecting the character of Peter Parker and really showing like how hard it is to be a superhero, but also wanting to have a normal life. And it's so great. And some of the action sequences in this movie are still absolutely amazing. Admittedly, there's some CGI moments in the film that haven't aged great. But a lot of the action has aged really well, and that whole train sequence, the way it's filmed, I mean, most of modern Marvel movies, I mean, a lot of the direction in it feels quite cookie cutter, feels basic, where Sam Raimi is one of those filmmakers that actually has a vision, and you can feel his style throughout these movies. It has that artistic stamp that I think a lot of modern superhero movies are missing, specifically that of Marvel superhero movies. Even though I know he directed Doctor Strange, I never saw it because I just don't care, but yeah, Spider-Man 2, one of the best superhero movies of all time, and more importantly, one of the best sequels of all time. We're going to a classic, a film that is often named as being one of the greatest sequels of all time, one that's better than the original. Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back. As you can tell, I have this framed photograph that I actually found at a thrift store for $5, and it was already in the frame, of the original Star Wars, A New Hope. I love the first Star Wars movie. It's one of my all-time favorite movies, but I do think Empire Strikes Back is a more compelling film. It looks a lot better. That's the thing, is that special effects wise and visually and in terms of the direction, which the film was directed by Irvin Kershner, not George Lucas, it is so much more solid in Empire Strikes Back in comparison to Star Wars. The story feels like it has significantly higher stakes. It is darker in tone, but I think that works to the film's benefit. It's not like a bleak movie. In comparison to like a lot of modern movies. It certainly has very intense moments, certainly the most intense of the original trilogy, But yeah, I love the build-up throughout this movie. I love Luke's character arc, and the confrontation he has with Vader that ends this movie is so tragic and fucking epic, and it's just one of the greatest cliffhangers in all of cinema. Definitely the best Star Wars movie. I still stand by it. I only really care about the Star Wars trilogy, the original. Everything else outside of that, I'm just really not the biggest Star Wars fan outside of those 3 movies, but Empire Strikes Back, whenever I'm in a Star Wars mood, it is one of my go-tos. Absolutely. Okay, so similar to that of The Raid 2, the next movie I'm talking about is one of the very rare sequels that completely blows the original out of the water, in my opinion. I am talking about Top Gun Maverick. I am not a Top Gun fan of the original movie, that is. I think it looks good. I think the soundtrack is awesome. That's really about it. In terms of me actually caring about anything going on in that movie, I couldn't care less. I think that film has a very lackluster story that has like little to no stakes in it. It's mainly just these fighter pilots trying to be cool, and you know, it's hyper masculine macho tone. I think it's kind of goofy. So when Top Gun 2 was announced, I was like, oh, one of these cash grab legacy sequels, I don't care. But buzz around that movie started to gain very quickly, where everyone's like, no, seriously, this movie is amazing, and you don't even have to like or even really watch the first movie to enjoy this film. I was like, really? Is it really that good? I had already seen the first Top Gun. I was like, all right, I'll go watch Top Gun Maverick. And holy shit, people were not lying. Top Gun Maverick isn't only like an amazing action movie. It's one of the best action movies of this current decade we were in, the 2020s. You know, it's a film that actually has a story. It actually has meaningful character arcs. It actually has stakes that feel exciting as hell, because the entire plot is building up to the third act of this movie, which has some of the most exciting kinetic action sequences I've ever seen. Obviously, because there's such a huge time gap between Maverick and the original Top Gun, visually speaking, this movie is significantly better, but that's because, you know, advancement in filmmaking and special effects have increased so much since the 80s. But regardless, it does add to the film being much more enjoyable to watch. And I was just really surprised, because I went into the movie with fairly low expectations and was like, damn, this is just a really fun, incredibly well-made action movie where I actually care about what's going on, which I can't really say that I care about anything happening in the first Top Gun personally. So yeah, this is one of those rare sequels where I think it is so much better than the first one, like way, way better. I'm sure there's a lot of old school Top Gun fans going to get mad at me saying that. Don't get too upset. It's just my opinion. These are just movies after all. But no, Top Gun Maverick, way better. Coming down to the last 2 movies on this list, and the next one I'm talking about, which I'm not going to talk too much about because I have a very long video that breaks down the specifics of why I love this movie more than the original, and that is Blade Runner 2049. I did a video a couple months back talking about why I think Blade Runner 2049 is significantly better than the first Blade Runner. So for anyone who wants to hear the specifics on that, I'll link it in the description below. But to make a long story short, Blade Runner is one of those movies where I think it is visually one of the most stunning and impressive films ever made, especially in the pre-digital era in the early 80s. I think the themes that the movie is trying to explore are some of my favorite themes explored in science fiction, and I think the movie does that very effectively. Where the film falls flat for me is in terms of its love story between Decker and Rachel. I think its pacing is a little too sluggish for its own good in some moments. And I think Roy Batty is the most interesting character in the movie, and he's not really in the movie a whole lot. So basically, all of the complaints I have about Blade Runner get 100% corrected in Blade Runner 2049, where it takes the same strengths as that original Blade Runner in terms of its visuals, its aesthetic, its atmosphere, its themes, and it is supported with a much stronger narrative, with more compelling characters that I find much more engaging, and so much so that Blade Runner 2049 is my favorite science fiction film of all time. It's actually becoming more prevalent nowadays to say that Blade Runner 2049 is better than the original. I see a ton of articles and videos, people talking about why they feel the sequel is better, and obviously I agree with that, but there's a lot of diehard Blade Runner fans that think it's blasphemous to even suggest that the original Blade Runner could be topped in any way, shape, or form. Like I said at the beginning of this video, opinions will always vary, but to me, I want stories that I can connect to at the end of the day. And even though I really like the original Blade Runner, and I've seen it numerous times, Blade Runner 2049 gives me that emotional connection that I find lacking in the original film. Just one man's opinion. And the last movie on this list, which I was debating whether or not should be on this list, but coming to the conclusion that I think it definitely should be, is Mad Max Fury Road. Now, when it comes to the Mad Max series as a whole, like, the entire timeline is a bit sketchy in terms of like where certain movies take place and how far along the timeline it is in comparison to other movies. It's not very consistent. It's a little all over the place. But because of that, that's why I felt like I could include Mad Max Fury Road, because this sequel, in terms of its timeline or wherever it lands on the Mad Max timeline, it's really not that much different in terms of like Thunderdome or Road Warrior, and like we don't really know where these end up in the timeline. We just know it follows the previous movie. Mad Max Fury Road does follow Thunderdome. Where in the timeline does it follow Thunderdome? How many years? We don't really know. Doesn't really matter. But the reason I really wanted to include this movie on this list is because I think it's one of the greatest modern action movies ever made. I think it is, hands down, the greatest Mad Max movie. As much as I love Road Warrior, I grew up with Road Warrior. For a long time, that was my number one. But Fury Road basically takes the concepts in Road Warrior, which is like George Miller, I think, always intended to have an action movie tell a story through its action and have it be like that for its entire runtime. Well, that's exactly what Mad Max Fury Road is. It is a 2-hour-long chase scene that tells a story and develops its characters along the way. And it's absolutely amazing in terms of filmmaking. And I come across a lot of Mad Max fans that hate Fury Road, that think it's overrated as shit, that think it looks terrible, that think it's just lame. I don't understand that mentality at all, because to me, Mad Max Fury Road is like Road Warrior, but cranked to fucking 11. It takes all of the strengths of that movie and just makes it that much more exciting and kinetic. And honestly, it is now hands down the most rewatched movie in the Mad Max franchise for me by a lot. There are days where I am in a Road Warrior mood and I want to watch that, but most of the time, it's Fury Road for me. And similar to that of Blade Runner 2049, actually, in that both of these movies are legacy sequels, I feel so much more emotionally connected to what is going on in Fury Road than in comparison to any of the other Mad Max movies. Even Furiosa. I actually liked Furiosa quite a bit, but I do think it doesn't really come anywhere near the amazingness that is Fury Road, in my personal opinion. I love how streamlined and simple the story is, but how complex the characters make the story and how fantastic the performances are. And of course, the action sequences are some of the most like incredible that I've ever seen. So yeah, one of those sequels that I think is like, I will always debate it being the best. So anyway, guys, that's my list of my 10 personal favorite sequels that I think are better than the original. But I want to hear from you guys. What are your thoughts on my opinion of these films? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Just be respectful, but feel free to mention them in the comments below. And what are some sequels that you find significantly better than their originals? Mention them in the comments below. And as always, thank you guys for watching.